On this episode of Media Credentials, my guest is Sam Gardner. Sam is the Senior Director of Marketing and Communications for Florida Citrus Sports, the nonprofit that stages the Citrus Bowl, the Cheez-It Bowl, the Camping World Kickoff Game, and multiple other events in Central Florida. Although football might be the focus, it turns out that Sam has no off-season. We talk about the year-round impact of Florida Citrus Sports, and he explains how his experience as a journalist allows him to better understand the needs of visiting media, plus some favorite bowl game memories from Boomer Esiason to Fred Taylor and beyond. My name is Whit Watson, and this is Media Credentials. I'm a sports announcer who's worked a lot of places. This podcast will peel back the layers of sports media and show you how the sausage gets made. Through interviews with industry pros and my own experience, you'll understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and who's responsible for it. Your media credentials have been approved. Welcome into Media Credentials. When I was compiling a mental list of guests for the podcast, Sam Gardner was at the top because he embodies the concept, people who labor behind the scenes to bring you the sports you love. I've known Sam since 2009, when he joined Sun Sports and Fox Sports Florida as an intern. He was a social media specialist at a time when that concept was still brand new. He was a journalist first, and he still maintains the instincts of a reporter, but now he's on the other side of the table. He's the man out front when the world media comes to Camping World Stadium in Orlando. As the Senior Director of Marketing and Communications for Florida Citrus Sports, his list of responsibilities is staggering. 2 bowl games, 2 regular season classics at Camping World Stadium, international soccer, selection shows, membership programs. It is, as I've learned, a year-round job, serving local, national, and international media, visiting teams, spectators, FCS members, and the community at large. Although the people and the places that Sam and I talk about are local to where we live here in Orlando, the topics are universal. Ever-changing demands placed upon sports media professionals on the communications side, the roles that teams and venues can play or should play in their local communities, public-private partnerships and how big projects get funded, and how sports coverage has changed and will change. If you've got questions, Sam has answers. So, Sam, I'm going to let you run this down because this is literally your job to let people know exactly what Florida Citrus Sports does.
What we do has, changed. It seems to change every year and just become a bigger and bigger and bigger deal, and more and more and more events. We just had 22 stadium events at Camping World Stadium this past year with almost 1 million guests through the doors. When I started here 6 years ago, we were essentially a bowl game company for all intents and purposes. We had a couple bowl games in the latter part of the year, and then we had most of the year to kind of cater to a membership base and be a community impact organization and really plan for those tentpole events. And we still operate those games. We've got the Citrus Bowl and the Cheez-It Bowl, and we do the Florida Classic every year between Florida A&M and Bethune-Cookman. That is at Camping World Stadium in November, right before Thanksgiving. We're in the kickoff game business now. We do we've always done neutral site games here in Orlando, but really the past 5-6 years since Camping World got involved in the Camping World kickoff, have we seen that grow and balloon into a huge, now they have a whole week 0 built around some of these kickoff games you even see. And, we're excited to have Florida State and LSU this summer, but, it doesn't just stop with pro football anymore, or college football anymore, I should say. We had the Pro Bowl for 4 years when the NFL had it here in Orlando, and we helped them manage that. We're getting in the music business. We're getting in the e-gaming business. We're now professional soccer aficionados here at Florida Citrus Sports. We had 64,000 people at the Arsenal-Chelsea game here last summer, setting a Camping World Stadium soccer record. So it's, it seems like every year there's something new being added to the schedule, nothing coming off the schedule. And it's still about, at the end of the day, making it a really local, a thing that people who from Orlando are proud to be a part of, and a community initiative worth supporting. So that's all part of the effort as well. And, I know I'm rambling, but it just feels like there's an endless schedule of things to do here, and it's better than having nothing, I guess.
No, it's a huge list, and that's why I asked you to start with it. And I do want to touch on some of those events, if not all of those events. But let's get started where you started. Where'd you go to high school? Where'd you go to college? And how did you get into this industry?
Yeah, I'm from Orlando. I like to think that I'm a very stereotypical Orlando guy. Like you could probably look at me and be like, yeah, he's from Central Florida just by looking at him. But I went to Boone High School near downtown. Although I grew up on the east side of town, and went to the magnet program. They're thinking I was going to study finance. They had a law and finance magnet at Boone, and I thought I was going to be a businessman. And then I went there and kind of learned that I wasn't meant to be an accountant necessarily, but that it opened a lot of doors to other things. I got really involved in the journalism program at Boone with a teacher named Renee Burke, who was the advisor there. She now works with Orange County Public Schools and is awesome. And she, when I was between my junior and senior year of high school at Boone, the Orlando Sentinel used to do this high school internship program where they would bring in, 8, 10, 12 juniors getting ready to be seniors, and they'd, work on a couple stories and get a couple bylines over the course of the summer. But it was really just kind of about like becoming familiar with a newsroom and the process and working on deadline and things like that. And so I got, I remember covering the great outdoor games for the Sentinel as a 16-year-old and writing about like, logging or something. I can hardly even remember what the stories themselves were, but that just connected me with the Orlando Sentinel newsroom. And then the next thing I knew, when I had graduated high school, I was stringing football games for them and stringing soccer games and water polo, and basically covered every sport you could imagine. They used to have a pretty robust varsity section in the Orlando Sentinel on Thursdays, and I remember working with Buddy Collings and Bill Buckhalter and folks like that on a lot of that content. All of that leads to UCF. Like that was even before I'd really even started there. And so I kind of had this non-traditional path. I just spoke with a UCF class last night in their DeVos Sport Business Management program, kind of about my path to where I am. And when I was there, my goal was only ever to be a sports writer, and I was able to do that. So I had started doing a lot of high school sports for the Sentinel, and that kind of graduated to college sports. I was working with Ileana Limon, who's now the LA Times sports editor, deputy sports editor, at least. I was kind of her number two as she was covering the UCF beat, and I got to learn college football a little bit doing that. And from there, I found myself at Fox Sports Florida, which is where I first, encountered you and a lot of other, folks that I still keep in touch with and still rely on for broadcasts and other resources, and I was just very lucky. Like it happened that Fox Sports Florida was launching websites at the time that I was coming through. All the regional sites were. They needed someone to cover the Magic. They didn't have any money to pay anybody to cover the Magic, but I was already working for them, making their Facebook page happen. I basically volunteered myself. So I'll just do it for free in my free time, and that led itself to writing about the NBA for FoxSports.com. And I did that for 8 years. And the only reason I really got out of the journalism business was not so much by choice, but a lot of people remember the Fox Sports pivot to video, as it's, I guess, infamously known. But at the end of 2017 or middle of 2017, they had gotten rid of all the written content on their website, went to a video only model, which wasn't good for writers and editors like me. And I found myself in a position where I was looking for work, possibly looking for a new industry, because it's the journalism business being what it is. I was looking for something a little more consistent, and it sort of was, I don't know, it was serendipitous, I guess, that I wound up in my own backyard. I was a kid who grew up going to the Citrus Bowl with my dad every year. It was like a yearly Christmas present was getting Citrus Bowl tickets. So to be able to kind of enter into a role that wasn't in a field I'd really worked in, I'd always been on the journalism side of the equation. My familiarity, I think, got me in the door, and then it's been a really great learning experience from there.
And coincidentally, we had scheduled this podcast a little while ago, but in the days since, you posted something on Facebook, a memory that popped up from 2009, speaking on the topic of internships. You had an angel who answered your call. Tell that story.
Yeah, I was. It was funny that it popped up because Facebook will do that to you and make you nostalgic. But I see this thing from March 2009. That's back when you would post a status that was like Sam Gardner is like going to Chick-fil-A for lunch or whatever it is. Like and then at the time was Sam Gardner is hoping he gets a summer internship, and that was in late March of 2009. And then I remember couldn't have been 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks later. I was sitting on the patio at my girlfriend's apartment, and I was probably 3 or 4 Rolling Rocks deep on a Friday afternoon, and my phone rang, and it was a 407 number I didn't know, but I picked it up because I didn't know any better, I guess, and I was so glad I did because the woman on the other end of the line was a woman named Amy Pemple, who she was with Sun Sports from the very beginning and with Turner Sports before. She's very well regarded in like the sports media communication world, and she had called me. Basically, I'd never heard her name, I'd never met her, I didn't know her from Adam. Like I just answered the phone. She said, she introduced herself and said, your name was given to me as a reference. We're looking for someone to help us with our website and our social media that we're getting off the ground, and we'd be interested in having you come do that. And it was basically an internship offer for an internship I didn't know existed. And then they asked me to start that following Monday, which I, of course, did. And it was wild that, I felt like I had kind of spoken this internship opportunity into existence. And then, was able to parlay that into a career that I honest to God, I had mentioned in that Facebook post that the first like real job interview I ever had, like a formal interview process, going through different panels and having to like earn the job, get the job. Like it didn't happen until I got hired here, because I basically got hired by word of mouth by Fox, and then spent 10 years just continuing to earn it, I guess you could say. And it all worked out, but it was kind of it was weird to be 10 years deep in a career and never have had to interview for a job. So that was even an adjustment as I got into the new aspect of what I do.
The point about internships and word of mouth, I hear a lot. A lot of us started as interns. And when I started as an intern with the Magic in the 93-94 season, the team got to the playoffs for the first time ever. The following season, Penny Hardaway's second year in the league and Shaq's third, they got to the finals. And I thought, well, this is going to be an every year occurrence. Turns out that was not the case. But you had a similar experience, because even though you grew up a Magic fan, once you actually got into the league, so to speak, the first big event was the 2009 NBA Finals, when the Magic got up against the Lakers, just their second trip to the NBA Finals. And you were there.
Oh yeah, it was like living in a dream. Like I knew that there was no way on God's green earth I was going to be able to afford tickets to go to the NBA Finals or anything like that. The only way I was ever going to get in the building was if somebody was paying me to do it, or at least let me volunteer to do it. And I just was so fortunate. I remember starting that job at Sun Sports, Fox Sports Florida, with working for Amy, and it was May. The team was on their run. I remember doing a couple like earlier on in the playoff run, a couple of events, like watch parties and things that they'd had a little setup at, and we're doing some autograph giveaways, things like that. And that was kind of the initial introduction. But then once they reached the finals, I was thinking, oh well, goodness, like I gotta get in on this. Like how do I figure my way in the building? And I remember going. That was when I learned that NBA Finals credentials get applied for like months in advance, or certainly weeks in advance, and that there's a bunch of pre-approved folks who are already in the bucket well before the teams are announced, and that just getting a credential on the spot was not necessarily easy, especially for a first-year intern who had accomplished nothing in the sports world to that point. And so I remember going to Amy and just kind of like sheepishly asking, like, "Do you think I could get a credential? Like, is there a path to that happening?" And I just, she made a couple phone calls, and 2 days later, I came in and there was an NBA Finals credential sitting on my desk. And I remember going to the games with you and with Marissa, who was the intern, and I still remember shooting flip cam video on the court at the finals.
Oh yeah,
at the old Amway Center. Or old Amway Arena, I should say. There wasn't even the center yet. It's the TD Waterhouse Center for a long time. That's how I remember it. But it was just such like an out of body experience, because it was like going to my dream sporting event, but somebody was like asking me to do it and giving me a purpose there at the same time. So, I think that was kind of, certainly it was eye opening, and it was the type of experience that makes you say, oh, I don't want to not do this. Like, I want to stay in this business and find ways to, harness this excitement, whether it's the NBA Finals or going to a World Series or covering the Stanley Cup, all things that I was fortunate to eventually be able to do. But I don't think any of it starts if I don't have this, big-eyed look at the finals as a 20-year-old intern who has no idea what he's doing, but is just really happy to be there.
And speaking of credentials and the media relations experience, let's start with the football events, the American football events at Camping World Stadium. The Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, which is the SEC against the Big Ten, the Cheez-It Bowl, the ACC against the Big 12. You mentioned the Florida Classic, Bethune-Cookman versus Florida A&M, and I do want to hit on that separately in a second. But what is the most time-consuming aspect for you in the run-up to those bowl games?
I every year it seems like my job becomes a little bit more operational, and there's just a lot more like nuts and bolts that I'm putting together and answering questions for teams, and as they prepare for their own trips, because especially when it comes to the bowl games, it's a little different with the classic and kickoff games that are ultimately regular season affairs, and there's not a lot of fanfare around them other than the team coming to play the game and doing the things they have to do while they're there. But for the bowls, we go into bowl season and we know that we've got this sprint. We're going to announce teams on December 5th or whatever it is in a given year, and by a lot of times by December 23rd, 24th, before Christmas, we've already got bowl teams in town. So there's a lot of questions that have to be answered in a very short order, and so it's really a lot of it is just about being buttoned up and knowing all of the questions you're going to be asked before you're asked them, so that you have everything prepared. So we take a lot of time throughout the year for each of our events. One of the things I've worked on pretty diligently in the past few years is refining our operations manuals, which was not a thing when I started here that I thought I was going to necessarily be taking on. But then you get in the weeds and you're getting all these questions about everything from my pregame meal for the team to where does the wives and children go for the kiss and cry area after the game to meet the players and coaches after it ends, to media credentials, to live shots, to like all of the very functional media questions that you get. So it's we answer to a lot of broadcast questions where we're getting calls from ESPN and from the teams and from their we were coordinating cameras that are both shooting the game for content purposes and others that are shooting it for scout film purposes. Like there are just so many components that I didn't really realize were part of it, and it's it almost feels like sometimes the media stuff, it certainly isn't. It's certainly never an afterthought, but it's almost, you have to make time and find time to be intentional about, like, there are still things that need a lot of my attention on that front too, especially when you're talking about we have a game, we had Florida State Oklahoma in the Cheez-It Bowl this past year, and normally for the Cheez-It Bowl we'd probably expect, I don't know, in the 100 to 150 credentialed media range, somewhere in there, maybe closing in on 2, and we were almost to 3 for that game, and that's out of probably 500 requests, and that's and a lot of the requests are coming from outlets that you don't necessarily know, or writers that you don't necessarily know, or outlets who are requesting 5 credentials to something when they probably really only need 2 or 3, and kind of vetting all that is a really time-consuming process. So a lot of what we work to do to make that more efficient, make it easier to do in the moment when we're sprinting. In addition to site visits and getting all those logistical questions answered, we are doing, like I do the bowl game programs that you get on game day, and we do several other like in game. We write the in game script for the stadium. We our department handles a lot of the stuff that you see and hear when you go to the game runs through us. So in order to make time for all of it, we put a lot of effort into building a manifest of looking at historic data and knowing who covers the games and knowing who doesn't cover the games and knowing who doesn't show up when they get a credential approved for them. And we kind of work backward, and we know how many open seats we have. So there are a lot of folks who probably go into their credential operation like just looking to fill seats until they're out of seats. But our goal every time is to know exactly how many seats we have to fill and just backfill the ones that were not on our list going in, and that makes it a little bit easier process to vet.
Now, if you had nearly 300 media applications when Florida State came to Orlando, and UCF is moving to the Big 12 in 2023, and the Cheez-It Bowl has a tie to the Big 12, if it falls out that UCF gets invited to that bowl game, are you just going to hire an assistant for the week? Like, how are you possibly going to handle that?
If and when that happens, there will be more attention probably than any Cheez-It Bowl we've had to this point, especially depending on the matchup you get. It's a Big 12 ACC game, so if it turns out that it's UCF Florida State, for example, in the Cheez-It Bowl, or UCF Miami or something, UCF Clemson, somebody like that even makes it we see that when Clemson is here, they bring a much larger traveling contingent than, say, when Mizzou is here. Things like the distance and proximity and the status of the program all matters, and I would imagine that for any UCF matchup that we ever had in a bowl game, it would be a tough ticket to get and a tough credential to get, but especially depending on who the opponent potentially could be. It could be the biggest college football game Orlando's seen. It really is, especially when UCF's riding that momentum, and if they are able to move to the Big 12 and find success early and put themselves in a position where they're continuing to compete for top tier games in their conference bowl distribution system. We could see them sooner than later, and I think that'd be great because we see that the UCF fans, myself being one of them, I graduated from UCF. They really rally around the team's success, and certainly we hope to see more of it, and would love to get them back in the building because it's as it's been a bit since they played a game here in the Citrus Bowl, even though I certainly went to dozens of them myself growing up.
Yeah, UCF used to play their home games in the Citrus Bowl for years. In fact, I covered a couple of games there and then obviously built a stadium on campus. So college football, the NFL, when the Pro Bowl was in Orlando, yes, it's a lot of media requests and a lot of attention, but the process is fairly streamlined. It's been done for a long time. Compare that process to when you're playing international soccer matches in the stadium and you've got media from all over the world who perhaps are not as familiar with your systems, for whom English is not their first language. I would imagine that's a very, very different process.
Yeah, and it's a real bear to take on. I remember the first year we did Florida Cup in 2021 when we had our initial lineup. We had Arsenal was in it from England, and then we had Inter Milan, which had just won Serie A in Italy, and we had a Colombian team and a Mexican team, and all four places you're getting a bit different vibe from in terms of how their media operate, what they're used to, what kind of access their team provides normally, what they expect from the media coverage experience, and like you said, they don't all even speak or write the same language. So we really had to. It's kind of about like knowing that you don't have to be the expert at everything, but trusting that you're hiring really good people to help support. I think is probably the best thing we can do around those types of events. So like I don't need to be the guy deciding which Brazilian media outlets are and are not the most valid for credentials to the Florida Cup. Like I don't need to be trying to respond to emails that are written in a language I don't natively speak when we can bring in an expert who is works with those markets and works with those outlets and can cater to them in a way that's much more, I think, like appropriate and fitting for whatever it is they're expecting. So we have consultants who we bring in, people who either they work in we had a couple consultants from we had one who was living in Colombia, one who was living in Brazil. We've had another one who works with FIFA, who is well versed in international soccer and really put a lot of the weight on them, whether it's vetting stories or pitching stories or facilitating interviews, whatever it is, trusting that other people can and will do a good job and knowing that you don't have to be the guy who has all the answers. I think there's some comfort in that because, there really is. I remember one of the first, I got, I don't know, over my skis a little bit. And I started, before we had hired some of these people, I remember sending out some pitches for just radio interviews because Ricardo, who is our CEO of Florida Cup, he speaks German, Portuguese, Spanish, English. Like he speaks several languages, and I sent out, essentially Google translated these pitch requests into different languages, and we're sending them to outlets that I didn't even know if they were taking me seriously because I didn't know how good the Google Translate was. So there are a lot of things like that you run into, and you find it's just a lot easier to let someone who knows what they're doing do it and learn from them rather than feel like you got to lead the charge at all times.
I want to step back to the Florida Classic for a moment. That's Bethune-Cookman from Daytona Beach against Florida A&M from Tallahassee, a couple of HBCU schools in the state of Florida. They have a rivalry that's also something of a family reunion when they play each other in the Classic at the end of the regular season. I've covered the event. It's one of the only college football games you'll ever see where people will go to get their food and drink during the second quarter because they want to be seated at halftime to watch the bands. The Marching Wildcats, called the Pride, and the Marching 100 from Florida A&M. Is there any special dispensation? Do you do anything differently in terms of format? It's like a 45-minute halftime sometimes. What's different about that regular season game compared to any other bowl game situation?
Yeah, no, what's interesting about that is that you're under some degree of mandate from the broadcaster of how much time that they have allotted for halftime. So,
Right.
making sure you stay within that window, it can ultimately lead to something that results in a penalty or a fine, and that's not something we want to get into. And one of the great things that we host during Classic Week that that you still have all the spectacle of the game day halftime performance, and there's usually special guests or some sort of elaborate formations. But we actually do the night before the game at Amway Center up the street. We do the Battle of Bands, and we have 8 or 10 high school bands from around the state that come in, and then both college bands, and they play extended sets there where they honor all their seniors, and they do, they'll both come out and play for 20, 30 minutes and then do some really unique and cool stuff. And so a lot of people use that as kind of that gets them amped for game day, and then people come back for the game itself, and they settle in, but at least they've gotten a pretty good taste of the band already, so that we're hopefully not pushing the limits on how far we stretch halftime.
And there's a little geography lesson necessary here for those that have not been to Orlando for one of the bowl games. The Camping World Stadium, the Orlando City Soccer Stadium, and the Amway Center are essentially in one long corridor together west of Interstate 4. And that neighborhood, the surrounding neighborhood, is known as Paramore, and it's been over the years an economically challenged area. And I, as an observer, as a member of the media, feel like the teams involved, the Magic, Orlando City, and Florida Citrus Sports, the organizations involved, have been very good stewards of that neighborhood and of the environs that surround the venues specifically. And this is kind of a hard right, but you let me know about this, and I had the chance to watch a video with Steve Hogan, the CEO of Florida Citrus Sports, a project called Lift Orlando, which invested $120 million in the neighborhood that surrounds the football stadium. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I love talking about this because it's honestly my biggest point of pride with what we do. We're a 501c3 ultimately, and what we do is meant to benefit the neighborhood we live and work and play in. And back in 2014, you would remember the kind of venues funding discussion that took about a decade in
Right.
the early 2000s. So basically from 2006 to 15, there was all this debate about, we need a new arena, we need to upgrade our football stadium, we need a world-class performing arts center, all of these great tourism and even local resident assets to bring people to downtown. And when all that was said and done, we ended up, the venues passed a $1.1 billion package that funded all three, and about 250 or so of that original budget, 250 million that is, was dedicated to the stadium. And there was this kind of prevailing thought that, okay, great, we've put some money into the stadium, we've done some work to get it competitive with other buildings that are trying to host the same events we are, but what good is any of that if it's in the middle of the most underfunded zip code in all of Central Florida? And there are metrics to show you that, and it's just a general lack of investment over 40, 50, 60, 70 years. And so the thought was, how could we possibly be proud of a $250 million renovation if it's not helping the people who live in these truly historic neighborhoods around us? So Paramore is more Paramore kind of cuts off, for those who don't know OBT, or Orlando at OBT, and then the other side of OBT, which is where the Camping World Stadium hits, it's Orange Blossom Trail, is that it's considered West Lakes, is that neighborhood specifically, and it's made up of 5 smaller neighborhoods. So you've got Rock Lake and Lake Lorna Dune and the Lake Sunset. There's a few. They're all on lakes, and so we really made our area of focus after the 2014 renovations on that specific footprint, and we worked with other business leaders, with Advent Health and CNL Financial and Lowndes Law and others to found a group called Lift Orlando that was kind of, we didn't even really have the plan cooked yet, but we knew we needed to be doing something and do something beyond what is required of us to maintain a certain tax status and get certain funding for the stadium. So the way that project started, we're not so bold as to think that we can just walk into anybody's living room and immediately gain the trust of people who have lived in a community that it has not, it's been lied to before, it's been underserved before. We're not going to just come in and solve everybody's problems immediately. So what we started with was actually the largest urban survey in City of Orlando history, in 1,400 homes and living rooms, asking the residents of the neighborhood, what is it that if you could make the plan to improve your own neighborhood and to get funding in the right places and to support projects that would support you, what would you be doing? And that's sort of, that survey was how we arrived at the four pillars that make Lift Orlando what it is. So the things that they focus on most kind of strategically are health and wellness, mixed income housing, cradle to career education pipeline, and economic viability. So, jobs and growth and employment and entrepreneurship and all of those sorts of things. And so those are the four buckets that Lyft supports, and all of the projects fall into one of them. And so in the past 7 years, well, I guess it's time flies with more like 9 years since the stadium reopened. We've seen $120 million in development in just that West Lakes area around Camping World Stadium. We've got an early learning center that is world class through the Primrose Foundation and Advent Health for Children. There's a affordable housing and affordable senior housing complex there. There's a Boys and Girls Club, 31,000 square foot Boys and Girls Club, the nicest one in Orlando, just opened about a year ago in the neighborhood. And we actually just a few weeks ago opened a health and wellness center called the Heart of West Lakes. It's just, you can see the stadium from where it sits. You can't not see the stadium from pretty much anywhere in West Lakes. And I remember when I started here, one of the, you hear a lot of numbers when people are trying to quantify investment or poverty or whatever however the discussion is being framed. One of the things that really stood out to me the most as we learned about the health and wellness initiatives, especially, was the access to healthcare and the role that plays in being healthy and raising a healthy family and development in general. The number that always I can't shake is that in Winter Park, which is an affluent suburb of Orlando, just north of downtown, pretty well off, 32789 has 112 healthcare access points in the community. And in West Lakes, which is the area that surrounds Camping World Stadium, it's about the same size, about the same number of people, and there were 12 healthcare access points in the same type of community for all intents and purposes. And that's just, it's an unacceptable number. It's not how it should be. So working with private and public funding and donors to working with free market tax credits and other things like that I never thought I'd be in that business, but doing everything and making every call and pulling every lever you can to get things done, it all pays off when you can open the health and wellness center that's now this just beautiful asset in the middle of West Lakes that the residents can lean on and know that they have much easier and much more reliable access to. Little things like that go a long way. It sounds like little things, but they're huge things. And what we're seeing is that with an approach that started by not, you don't want to come into a community and just think that you're going to transform it all by yourself. So I think the fact that we started by kind of engaging with the community about what it wanted to see and then worked on executing that vision, I think we started from a really good place, and I think it's something that we can hopefully scale and do in other communities throughout Central Florida, because it's certainly not as though West Lakes is the only area that could use some more investment and more support. And so hopefully this is the start of something bigger, but we're really proud to have, $120 million of capital investment in 7 years after it really wasn't even a $250 million renovation. It was a $200 million renovation when it was all said and done. I think that's kind of proof of performance. And, it kind of goes to show that a stadium can do good for the neighborhood that it sits in, even though that's not always the expectation.
In speaking of all these initiatives that maybe are outside the realm of competition on the field, what kind of activities, what kind of events do you hold to help support those?
Oh, yeah. One of the things we love to talk to our members about, especially, is the full year of events that you get out of being here and knowing that it's all kind of going back toward the community. And, so it starts in the fall. We have our annual Feast on the 50, where we essentially turn the field at Camping World Stadium into a big tailgate. We have, food and drink vendors and alumni clubs from all over. And it's sort of our football season kickoff. And that's just always a huge, well-attended event. 5,000 people out there on the field. It's awesome. And it really kind of sets the tone for football season. And then, more recently, we hosted a celebrity golf tournament a few weeks ago. It was our second annual of a driving impact that we do as a fundraiser for Lift Orlando. And we had, some Pro Football Hall of Famers and Baseball Hall of Famers. We had Fred McGriff out there with us. We had, Coach Norvell, Coach Malzahn from UCF and Florida State. We had a really great lineup of participants. And we raised more than $200,000 for Lift Orlando at that event. we've actually got our annual Sideline Wine and Dine event coming up later this month on the 14th of April, where we basically take the suites and clubs at the stadium and turn it into a little bit of a different kind of food and wine fest. And that's our primary fundraiser of the year for Lift Orlando. And there's some auction and raffle and other components to that too. One of my favorite projects, I get to build a speakeasy in the press box, which is probably like the best use of the press box on any given day of the year. I love the event. I love the cause it supports. And so those are always really special, a lot of fun. And we're looking forward to hosting that here in a couple of weeks.
The stadium, Camping World Stadium, has been in the same place since the 1930s. And that neighborhood grew up around it at a very different time. Bowl games in Orlando go back to 1947. And you made an interesting point about the neighborhood has been promised things before, right? How much of the fact that there's such stability at Florida Citrus Sports, the CEO, Steve Hogan, began working there in 1995, and he's been the CEO since 2006. And there's a lot of people in that office who are either Orlando natives or UCF graduates or both, like yourself, or have just simply been there for a long time and have deep connections in the community. How much does that help you, not only in these community initiatives, but in general, in trying to build trust, not just with the neighborhood, but with every entity, every stakeholder that you deal with?
I think there's definitely something to be said for, a lot of times we'll meet some of these blue blood college football programs when they're doing their bowl site visits. And you'll find a lot of the most prominent, prolific teams have people who have been there for a really long time because they've just always done it well and they've supported their own people and made sure to keep good talent around. And then thankfully, that's something that Florida Citrus Sports is also, just spiritually and financially invested in, is building a really great team and keeping a really great team. So when I started here, I remember there were so many people in the office who had literally, they'd been here for 15 years, and it almost felt like, who am I to step in and try to adjust anything when they know what they're doing so well. But it's you see people who leave Florida Citrus Sports and then come back and work later. Susan, our SVP of Ops, she worked here in our sponsorships department in the 90s, and now she's back in a high level operations role. So you see people leave and come back. You see people who never leave at all. Steve's a perfect example. He's been here 30 years at this point, and more than half his life. And it's if you Steve, you've met him and talked with him and worked with him. So he's a very sincere and genuine person, and he comes off exactly like he actually is. When he talks to, whether it's the class we went and spoke to last night, or talking to members, or talking to residents, or talking to staff, or other colleagues that work for the stadium, or work for the city, or work for sponsors. Like he's always the same guy, and he's always kind of pushing the same message in it. We're all very aligned with him, and very we support our guy because we know that he supports us, and I think that there's a lot of camaraderie here that I have not seen at other places I've been, in some cases, because, companies are just big. When you work for Fox Sports is too huge to have that, kind of family atmosphere on a broad scale. But, we're a big company and a growing company, but we're still pretty small in the grand scheme. And so, you feel a lot of ownership when you work on projects here. You are used kind of, your versatility is important here, and everybody does a little bit of everything. And I think that's what keeps people here and builds some rapport, like you said, with community partners and conferences and broadcast partners and teams and media and everybody else. I think there's something to be said for knowing that you're going to get the same faces and the same experience, every time you come. And hopefully that's something that we're mostly cashing in on.
So in a minute, I'm going to ask you, because you mentioned that you grew up in Orlando going to bowl games at what is now the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, and so did I. And I'm going to ask you for your favorite memory from one of those games. To give you time to think, I'll tell you mine. And I sent you a note about this earlier. The 1980 Tangerine Bowl, first bowl game I ever saw. My parents went to the University of Florida. They were playing in the game against Maryland. The Gators won that game 35-20. I had to go back and look that up. I'm not as quick as you are at that. The starting quarterback for Maryland, I always remembered it as a 9-year-old kid being Boomer Esiason. But that's not true. It was actually Mike Tice, who was the starter, who then went on to coach in the NFL. Boomer was a freshman on that team, And then you came back and told me he came back in 1983 to the Tangerine Bowl and got knocked out of the game by Reggie White of the University of Tennessee. That's why I love talking to communications guys, because you've got stuff like that just instantly. I love that nugget about Esiason coming back in 83. So 1980 was the first bowl game I can remember ever seeing. So in Orlando. So I'm going to give you the chance now. What are some of your memories about attending as a fan?
I remember easily the one that stands out the most. I grew up a big, despite having been a UCF Knight in the end, I grew up a huge Florida Gator. I had a blue and orange painted room. I was the biggest Gator fan you knew. And I remember 1998, I guess it would have been January 1, 98. So the end of the 97 season is when they played Penn State in the Citrus Bowl. And I remember, it was kind of a tradition for my dad and I to go to the game, and we'd seen several before and after that. But with the Gators coming, I'd never seen the Gators live, and I was pretty amped about the possibility, but wasn't sure if we'd be able to go. And your parents do the old, oh look, we forgot one Christmas gift type of deal.
Love it. That's always a good one, by the way. Always a good one.
Always a good one. So that I got the, oh shoot, we forgot one thing. And it was tickets to see Florida play Penn State. They ended up winning 21-6 in that game. I think Fred Taylor had some absurd number of yards. I'd have to go back and double check. The comms guy doesn't have that committed to memory, unfortunately, but it was more than 200 yards rushing. And I just always remember that game. And the thing I remember was I was sitting in the upper bowl. They weren't good seats, but I was there, and it was packed. It was sold out. It was, there was 73,000 people there. Like, we can't even put that many people in the building anymore. We don't have that many seats. But it was the biggest, most awesome sporting event I'd ever been to. It was my favorite team playing. They won the game. And I don't know why this sticks with me, but I remember walking back to the car with my dad after the game, and the people who, in the way that they sell, like, newsprints, out on the street after the game, for showing the Gators won or whatever, they had T-shirts that were already made with like the final score on them. And I remember thinking, who is that far ahead that they're doing this? And they're like, even as a kid, I was just blown away by just how much kind of pageantry and spectacle there was to it all. So that game kind of, I think, is where I fell in love with college football, probably, and it really grew from there. I mean, they weren't all good experiences. I just distinctly remember one game. Oh, geez, dude, I'm testing myself again. Maybe 2006 or 7. It was Auburn against Wisconsin, and I remember going with my dad and my uncle, and we scalped tickets in the parking lot that day. And we scalped tickets from a guy whose map did not have the right seating numbers in the sections. Like, he had just a phony map that was telling us we were sitting somewhere we weren't. And at that time, I did not know the stadium layout like the back of my hand. So we ended up with tickets that were very much not where we paid to sit, because we bought them from a dude in the parking lot. But over the next few decades, I've learned a lot about ticketing and sporting events, and hopefully I'm in a better position to not end up in the section I didn't mean to be in again.
On that note, if you could change something about college football, whether it's the playoff, whether it's NIL, whether it's any of the current topics in college football, is there anything you would change?
I mean, I'm sure there's always, if there's always something to improve or something to change or something to make more efficient. But I don't have some sweeping change off the top of my head. I think finding a way for the Citrus Bowl to be part of the New Year's Six would be great. That if it changed in that way, I think we here in Orlando would love it. But I think it really is. It's a great product as it is, and the passion of a college football fan. You're seeing it a little bit with March Madness right now too in college basketball, and it's unique. It's just going to the Final Four is a very different experience from going to the NBA Finals. Back to an earlier topic we had, and I think the authenticity, especially the student element of college sports, is really something special. Like, when I was at the March Madness games in Orlando a couple weeks ago in the earlier rounds, I remember just sitting by the pep bands and thinking just what a great energy they're bringing. And I think that all the pageantry you see around college football is part of what makes it so special, and part of why, no matter how the game or the way the playoff format is or the way NIL works, like all of those things are always going to change and continue to develop. But we want it to be the case that the pageantry, the experience of being there, the act of going to the game still feels like something cool and something special. And I think it is. And I don't really have, I don't want to say 10 out of 10 no notes, but a really great college football game is tough to beat.
One question as we get close to wrapping things up. This is obviously a pod that's geared towards sports media. And I'd like to know, as someone on your side, what are the trends that you see in terms of coverage, in terms of what outlets are applying to come cover an event in terms of streaming versus live. And the landscape of the industry, I've said this before, has changed dramatically, largely due to the pandemic. In many cases, we figured out we can do more with less. And there's a lot more remote broadcasting. There's been really a sea change in how these games and this information is disseminated. So from your side of the desk, what have you seen in the last few years, and what do you think we're going to see?
You're right on with the kind of COVID season, if you will, being the impetus, I think, for a lot of change in the industry. And when we really did have to figure out how do we, we went through that whole season not knowing even if we'd host games at the end of the year, much less who might show up or be able to show up to cover them. And when it got to be, go time, and we were hosting Northwestern and Auburn, and we were hosting, Miami and Oklahoma State, we had media that couldn't necessarily come to Orlando to cover it. We had to figure out a way to bring it to them, and that challenge was something that, I remember when Northwestern won that game, and Coach Hankwitz, it was his last game as their defensive coordinator. And I remember having Matt Fortuna of The Athletic zoom into our post-game press conference, where he was not on our credential list. He was not on our radar as someone who was covering the game. But because we made it so accessible, he was able to write a story about our game without having been there, without having planned to be there, or he didn't go into it knowing that was the story, but we made it, we brought it to him. And that's, that's something that we've continued to try to do, to make sure that, everything we do, even if it's an in-person media event, that there's access to it, and that people who aren't there can be a part of it, because we see the benefits, and we see the numbers and the coverage that comes with, bringing your operation into the digital world. We do a lot. We don't print anything in the press box anymore. I was up there for the XFL game the other day, and I noticed they had a lot of printed stats. You go to Citrus Bowl, Cheez-It Bowl, you're not going to get a single printed stat. It's just kind of how we operate now. There are a bunch of little kind of efficiencies like that we've kind of taken upon ourselves to, implement as kind of standard operating procedure, when we thought that they were just things that were going to, be temporary band-aids to get us through a bad season, or what could have been a bad season. Beyond that, if I can add a postscript to this, it's not uncommon to see news in the news industry about cutbacks and layoffs and staffing, and it's true. I mean, you don't have to look far to see that local outlets, national outlets, regional outlets are just less well staffed than they were before. They just don't have enough bodies to cover all their bases in some cases. So, the other thing we've really tried to focus on is how can we be a supplement to that, and provide, good B-roll and things like that are, free of messaging, but just helping people do their job a little easier, so that somebody doesn't have to send a photographer all the way out to Windermere High School to hoof it for 30 minutes of Kentucky practice. So, if we can send them a few clips, like things like that, and working, really one-to-one with outlets and understanding their needs or what they don't need. There are some outlets who will straight up say, we won't use a single piece of video you send us. We'll only use it if we shot it. Like, and just understanding all those dynamics. And, one thing I try to, I don't know if it's a good thing. I hope my bosses don't listen to this, but I'm probably like the worst PR guy, because I just don't, I'm never looking for us to get credit for anything. Like I really, to me, it's just about, making sure that they have the resources they need to cover it, because my spirit, I'm a journalist still. I think I want to provide the experience that I would have wanted to have covering games. That goes down to, we have plussed up our ASAP sports transcripts, that we now do those for every press conference, for every bowl week event, where that was not the operating procedure, things like that. Even the quality of the footage that you're putting out, and then, taking requests from people, or working with theme parks to get footage when the teams go visit Universal Studios, things like that, to just, get people into places where they can't be on their own. I think that we can, I want to look at us as a kind of an extension of the newsroom, and not necessarily like someone who's trying to impress our own views upon what the newsroom needs to cover.
In just a few seconds, we'll have some closing thoughts on this episode, so stay tuned. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider subscribing or sharing, and leave a review. Let me know what you'd like to hear in the future on Media Credentials. I wasn't planning to spend quite as much time as we did talking about investment in the local community and projects like Lift Orlando, but In hindsight, I'm glad that we did. As a broadcaster, it's easy to get cynical when teams and leagues start talking about giving back. It can sound cliched, and part of that, frankly, is fatigue. We hear it a lot. In golf, for example, you can't miss the fact that every tournament generates money for local charities every week because the broadcasts lean into that messaging every week. However, it is real money, and it is going to real people, and I was grateful to be reminded of that and more than willing to allow Sam to share it. And by the way, yes, it was the 1998 Florida Citrus Bowl where Florida beat Penn State 21-6, and yes, Fred Taylor did indeed have a monster game. He was the MVP. He rushed for 234 yards, a Citrus Bowl record that I believe still stands. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure that Sam will let me know. Thanks again for listening to Media Credentials. For examples of my work, including video and audio clips, a blog, and my contact page, check out whitwatson.com.